Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Danny Gillette. And we're back here on a Wednesday morning, a victory Wednesday morning, as the Nebraska basketball team got another huge win. Rink Mast had a night last night. 34 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. Absolutely went off, and a 14-point win for the Huskers, their 15th of the season. They've got now within one victory of matching their total from last year. So, Danny, how are you doing this morning, man? How are you feeling about this Nebraska basketball team?
Sometimes they look really good, other times they look completely lost, but lately they've been on fire, with the exception of the Rutgers game last Wednesday. They picked up two key wins in a span of a week here over Northwestern, and last night, and you know Ohio State. When I think of Ohio State basketball, I still think back to the Greg Oden and Evan Turner days, but those days are long gone by now. Makes you feel old, but at least we got the win.
Yeah, both teams, Ohio State came in, on the bubble, just like Nebraska, and the Huskers were without Jawan Gary, so they got a big victory. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Before we do that, if you guys haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you hit the like button, get into the comment section of this video. It really helps us share our content. But yeah, I guess, Rink Mast, goes off Nebraska, with a big victory. And I guess the big question, or at least from my mind is, how do you feel now about the Huskers' chances of making the NCAA tournament? They got two big victories. They're 5-4 in the Big Ten. Watching the post-game show on Peacock last night, I can't remember which commentator, but one of them basically said Nebraska fans need to stop thinking about whether or not their team's going to make the tournament, and they need to start thinking about what seed they're going to be. So I want to just kind of throw that out there. Do you think it's too early to take that step, or how do you feel about the Huskers' chances of making the NCAA tournament?
For me, it's still too early. They got to prove that they can win on the road. I mean, there's still a couple road games left, and I believe one of the Peacock commentators last night said that if the tournament was held at Pinnacle Bank Arena, then Nebraska would be NCAA champions. So, I love where we sit right now, but there's still a little bit of work to be done, and I think if they can just pick up some wins on the road over this last stretch here, they can make the tournament. But I'm not ready to crown them, you know, tournament qualifiers until it actually happens. And just looking at their schedule really quickly, I mean, they're going to be playing, at Maryland, Wisconsin at home, which is good. Um, Badgers almost got a scare last night against Minnesota, so then they're at Northwestern, Michigan's at home, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at Michigan again. So they got a couple of games here to end the season that they just need to be mindful of, and um, so although I like where we sit right now, there's still work to be done.
Yeah, I'm looking at this schedule right now, and I think they got to go 2-2 over the next 4 games. That's how I'm looking at it, and that's not going to be easy with 3 games on the road and then Wisconsin at home. So, Northwestern. I mean, that was a battle here, at the Vault, and they're going to have to play that game on the road. They're another team that's trying to make the tournament. Illinois is ranked, and they do, I believe, have Terrence Shannon back now. Maryland's capable. I mean, they're definitely not as good as they have been in past years, but they do have some players. So they're going to have to, because I mean, yeah, if you go 1-3 during this stretch, then you're sitting at what, 6-7. I mean, it's not that horrible because Michigan's not good. And when they play Michigan, they won't have Doug McDaniel. So, I mean, they just absolutely got lambasted by Purdue last night. They barely looked like a Big Ten team. So,
I
and then
saw some of that game, and yeah, they did not look up to the task last night.
no, so I don't see them beating Nebraska. Penn State also is not that great. Minnesota at home, they should be able to. I mean, so just if they win, those 4 home games, Rutgers, Minnesota, Penn State, and Michigan, and then if they could beat Michigan on the road, which they should be able to do, because I mean, Michigan just looks bad right then. They're last place in the Big Ten. They're 7-12. So I mean, there should be enough wins. But yeah, I do also agree with you. It's way too early to say like they're in the tournament because things can go awry quickly. I mean, I've seen, I've seen teams that are ranked in the top 25 at points in the season that, fall apart and don't make the tournament. So there's still a lot of basketball to go. There's 11 Big Ten games left, but like I think I've said multiple times, so we're sitting at 5-4 right now. If they can get 6 more wins, there's no way these guys are missing the tournament. Probably 5. If they get 5 more, they probably have a really good chance of making it.
My thing is, which team is going to show up? The team that beat Purdue, for example, or the team that lost to Minnesota back in December? I mean, they always seem to have one of these letdown games. I mean, last week it was Rutgers, and I just hope they don't let up over this final stretch here because a lot of players have been playing really well, and we could talk about it a little bit more. But, I just hope that they, stick to what works and that they continue to play at a high level and don't have one of their, kind of lapses here.
Yeah, they need to play better on the road, which they've proven they can. I mean, they beat Kansas State on the road, and I believe that Kansas State's leading the Big 12 right now. So, or at least one of the top teams in the Big 12. So, I mean, Nebraska can definitely, play on the road. And they've had, I mean, in the Rutgers game, I mean, they had a double-digit lead that they gave away. Same thing to Minnesota. So it's like, it's really frustrating because if you had won those 2 games, man, you'd be sitting at 7-2 right now in the Big 10. So not only would you be in the race for the Big 10 championship, but you would be sitting at 17-3, and you probably would be, being seated, quite a bit, not quite a bit higher, but probably in that 6-7 range, So, but I mean, it is what it is. You can't, take those moments back, but you've got to
And it's
find
the
a
Big
way.
Ten. I mean, anybody can be anybody on any given night. So,
Yep. But you got to find a way to win one of these 3 road games. And then if you could beat Wisconsin at home, I mean, then I feel like you're in a really strong spot, going down the stretch because the schedule isn't that hard. I believe I saw something where the strength of schedule in the Big Ten, Nebraska is like ranked 13th over the last, 11 games or so. So there definitely is an opportunity. I mean, you play Michigan twice, you play Penn State at home, you play Ohio State. I mean, on the road, which isn't easy. Maryland, but there's not, you don't have to play Purdue. You don't have to play Michigan State, who's probably going to be like battling for an NCAA tournament berth. You do have to play Illinois, which is a really good team, especially at their place. That's going to be a tough game. So, and Northwestern, and obviously, at Indiana. But I mean, the Big Ten's a tough league. So, I mean, but it's 5-6 more wins. I think if this team gets to 20 wins, they're probably going dancing.
Yeah, and that'll be a big accomplishment for Fred Hoiberg and, a big accomplishment for this team. And it was interesting last night, the limited minutes that Casey Tominaga had. I don't know if you know anything that I don't, but he only played 14 minutes last night. So I'm wondering why that was.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that was either. And yeah, well, I guess we'll hear from Fred. I mean, he usually is pretty open about injuries and things, and maybe just I'm not sure exactly.
I will say
why
the
that
offense
was.
looked a little bit better without Casey on the floor because sometimes Casey has a tendency to just chuck up shots, and that allowed Rinnick Mass to kind of really, establish his presence in the post.
Yeah, that's my next topic. Like an incredible night for Rink Mass. I mean, 34 points, 10 rebounds, like I said earlier, 4 assists, but 6 of 8 from the 3-point line, 13 to 17 for the game. So it's not like he was chucking up tons of shots. He was incredibly efficient. I mean, he's had some really big moments for this team, and that of all the transfer portal additions, I mean, he definitely was the best. I mean, not Bryce Williams was really good, and Josiah Leak, obviously, all of them were solid pickups.
Yeah.
But Rink Mass is I mean, he's got to be in consideration for some type of all Big Ten, selection, postseason honor, and he does have an extra year too. He doesn't have to, this isn't going to be his last year. I mean, unless he decides to like go pro or something. But I don't see him as like an NBA player. Probably more of, somebody who could play professionally in Europe. So I think there's a good chance he'll be back next season too, which is another great thing for this program.
And he had a really great game against Northwestern on Saturday, and he carried it over, on Tuesday night. So I think, he's starting to figure out where he fits on this team in terms of how to play. And, that's playing inside, throwing up a 3-pointer or 2 occasionally, but mostly playing inside. And, he's done a really good job of kind of helping out offensively and, finding that touch around the rim, which is extremely important.
One of the things that impressed me the most about the win for Nebraska last night was the defense impressed me. Just holding Ohio State under 70 points, and they did give up some 3-point shots to Bruce Thornton and to Jamison Battle, which is something I was worried about going into the game. But what they did do and were able to do is limit their 3-point attempts. So they only attempted 4 3-pointers, and as a team, Ohio State excuse me, they attempted 27, but they only made 8. So I mean, really, if you take away, those guys made 5 out of 8 shots. The rest of the team was, 3 of 15 from the 3-point line. So it seems like to me they did a really good job of keeping those guys from shooting threes, and that's what you want to do as a team defensively. You want to make opponents shoot difficult 2-point shots because that's the most low percentage shot, and that's the least value, right? Because if you make a long two, you only get 2 points. So I mean, it makes sense, and I thought they did a good job of that. And another thing that impressed me is offensive rebounding. Ohio State's one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, and Nebraska is one of the worst teams at giving up offensive rebounds. And they out rebounded Ohio State on the glass and on the offensive glass, and then they had 6 turnovers. That was the first time all season they've gone through a Big Ten game with less than 10 turnovers. So if you can, I mean, if this team can give up fewer 3-pointers, limit teams on getting offensive rebounds and limit their turnovers, they're going to be really hard to beat.
Absolutely, and you're kind of seeing the development also of some players in terms of finding their role. We talked about Mast finding their role and finding his role and picking up his play. I think CJ Wilcher has done a nice job over this last stretch here of really, embracing his role off the bench. And, he made some really big shots on Tuesday, and he's really kind of come on as a player that can be counted on to provide a cushion if you're in the lead or to help you come back. And one of the things that's interesting too is I see some parallels between, Wilcher this year and Jamarcus Lawrence and even Casey Tominaga last year. There were players that kind of came onto the scene during Big Ten play and really provided a boost for Nebraska during the final stretch run. And I think Wilcher's that guy this year. And also with the increased minutes, Eli Rice has done a really good job of, kind of establishing himself in the rotation as well. You remember he first kind of received big minutes against Iowa. And, on Tuesday he had 4 points and 3 rebounds in 15 minutes. So it's not a huge stat line, but he definitely made a contribution, and it's good to see some of these guys, much like again, Casey, Sam Hoiberg, Jamarcus Lawrence last year. We have Rice, Wilcher, and others really stepping up this year to provide, insurance for, the remainder of the season and hopefully, for a long Big Ten tournament run.
Yeah, CJ Wilcher to me should definitely be in the mix for sixth man of the year in the Big Ten because he's been spectacular, especially over the last 10 games. For this season, he's shooting 44% from 3-point range, but over the last 10 games, he's making 2.4 3-pointers per game. And basically, in 8 out of his last 10 games, he's made at least 2 3-pointers. So, and he's only had one game where he hasn't made one. So, I mean, he's been extremely consistent. He's starting to play more minutes. You see his minutes, and that actually probably has to do with Juwan Gary being out because he's kind of a natural, replacement. But whatever the role is, I mean, he's been spectacular this season. So that's just an example of, there's guys coming in the transfer portal, and he just kept working, and he didn't worry about what his role was going to be, and he just continued to get better. And I think people a lot of times underestimate, that improvement from within. We always want to look at off-season additions and who was added to the team or whatever, but a lot of times, like, it's just about getting your own players to be better, to improve your own talent. And Fred Hoiberg's done a really good job with that, not just with CJ Wilcher, but, Sam Hoiberg, his own son, and not just because of Fred, obviously, but, Keisei Tominaga, a lot of these guys have really, Eli Rice, you've been talking about Jamarcus Lawrence, but Fred Hoiberg is doing a nice job developing these players, and he's, reaping the rewards of that.
Yeah. And that's where you see, where he is able to really start building his program. And it took him a little bit, but, having large transfer portal classes allows you to develop the players already on your roster without rushing them. And he's done a good job of, kind of balancing that as well as, and, shout out to him and his assistants.
Yeah, they've done a great job. It's been fun, to watch this season play out. I mean, it's kind of played out exactly like we hoped that it would. And, we're sitting here in the back stretch, right where Nebraska needs to be. I think the latest bracketology I want to say they had one of the last 4 bye. I think they were at one point they were up to a 9 or 10 seed. It'll be interesting to see when it comes out. It might even come out today, maybe tomorrow from Joe Lenardi. That's the one I trust the most. I will check out like there's a site called Bracket Matrix, and I think it's interesting because there's like 90 bracketologists out there. There's a bunch of them, but Bracket Matrix will actually give you like it'll show you the percentage of how many brackets a team is in. So like it'll say, oh, Nebraska's in 77 of 94 brackets, which I think is helpful. And then I don't have to look up 94 brackets. But so I'll be checking those out. We'll probably have some stuff on huskerbigred.com about that. But as we said, right now, Nebraska definitely controls their own destiny, and they don't even need to go on like a deep run. Basically, they just need to go 500. If they go 500, for the rest of the way, like they're going to the NCAA tournament. So hopefully they can keep it rolling.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most deep team that Nebraska's had in quite some time, and they complement each other so well too. And I think that's been missing, complementary players that play off of one another over the last couple seasons. But this year, they've really done a nice job of working with each other and working together.
So basically, I know we try to talk about football. This is kind of a basketball centric show. Not a ton of stuff going on with the football program right now. I mean, there is a little bit of recruiting news, throwing out some new offers and things like that. One thing I guess we should mention that maybe we neglected to is Nebraska has shaken up the football operations staff a little bit. Omar Hales is no longer the director of player personnel. He's been replaced by Keith Williams, who was kind of was an assistant in that role before. And then they also hired former TCU general manager Anthony Crispino. They haven't really said exactly what position he's going to be, but has a lot of ties in Texas, works for Sonny Dykes at SMU. So just kind of some more behind the scenes, in the football operation stuff. But those are important jobs, even though people don't really see them on a day-to-day basis. But we saw the role that Omar Hales played, in recruiting it to say, at the very least.
Yeah, and those guys can help seal the deal with recruits, and if you don't have the right guy for the job, it's one of those where it needs to be, addressed immediately. And I think Hales did a good job, but we'll see, what can happen with this group. And Keith Williams has been around the Nebraska football program for a couple of years now, and I think it's good to hire within as well as get a fresh face in the operations department.
Yeah, and he played for Nebraska, was an offensive lineman. I believe he's coached some Division II or Division III football, where he's been, offensive coordinator and done some different things. While I believe he's worked for Nebraska as well, so he does have a lot of experience. And these are guys that are helping you, basically evaluating talent. These are guys that are sitting there breaking down film, and trying to see, is this a player that we should offer? So it is an important position. It definitely is. You want somebody in that role that's a good football person, and I think Keith Williams is going to do a good job there. And I'm not sure what happened with Omar Hales. I thought he did a good job. It's probably something where he's going to move on and try to get a better job, because it's not an on-field position. So, you can understand why it's not necessarily like a position you want to stay in for a long time. But I do think Keith Williams will do a good job. And as far as Crispino, it's just another person with Texas ties. So I do think that even though obviously, Nebraska's going to do a great job in the state of Nebraska and, Pennsylvania and some of those other places, that just shows you that Texas is still, a key part of their overall recruiting strategy.
As it should be. I mean, you look at Texas and even the group that we got from Florida this year, I think they're hitting all the right areas, and that's important too. And, on top of that, they're also not forgetting the state of Nebraska, which with the talent coming in over the next couple of years is a good sign as well.
And then another thing, Keanu Wilhite, we can update a little bit on his recruitment. He's the 6'5" defensive end who was signed with Washington and then got his letter of intent released after the coaching changes and stuff there. He was at Michigan State, visited Nebraska. He seemed to really like it. Talked about the facilities. He talked with Coach Rule and Tony White, and he talked about how he liked the aggressiveness of their defense, which I don't see why you wouldn't. I would want to play in Tony White's defense. He said that they think he can play actually more of a linebacker. They think he could be like a jack. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Michigan State's in the mix. He's going to have a home visit with UCLA. He's talking to Texas. So a lot of moving parts. He said that basically he wants to make a decision or sign early around the National Signing Day, which I think is February 7th this year. So that's kind of the timeline.
I'm just looking at my
Nebraska
calendar really quickly. Yeah, that
and
makes sense. First Wednesday in February.
Nebraska is expected, I think, to pay a visit to him in Arizona. So they are working hard to try to add him to the class, and there's some other competition as well. So we'll see how that plays out.
I love the focus on defensive end. I really do because, it wasn't a position of no production last year, but it's a position where we've been, a bit thin, and we were thin at defensive line coming into the season last year because we didn't know what Ty Robinson and Hutchmacher would necessarily bring, nor did we, I personally didn't think they would make as big an impact as they did last year coming into the season, and they addressed that and added James Williams, and now they're addressing defensive end. So, really good job of, shoring up all positions and making sure that this defense is well-rounded. I'm excited to watch this defense again for sure. I mean, when you look at the job they did last year and how many players, really played at a high level, I think it's going to be another fun year for the defense and hopefully the offense to match with it. And it's going to be a good time, I think.
Yeah, and so one other note on 2025 to touch on. So Pierce Mooberry, the in-state guy that was offered recently, will be visiting this weekend. There's some other guys. There was some talk of Alex Mansky visiting this weekend. I'm not sure if that materialized, but Jalen Williams, a 4-star defensive end. He's ranked in the top 300 according to the On3 industry rankings, is going to be visiting this weekend. He's been trending to Michigan at the moment, but I mean, it's looking like they're going to have a new head coach soon, so there could be an opportunity for Nebraska. And but he's a 2025 kid. Let's see, he's 6'6", 280. So I mean, that's like a perfect, guy you could fill in for like the not Tyson Terry, excuse me, Ty Robinson. That does what Ty Robinson does right now. I mean, in 6'6", 280 right now, so probably. By the time he's a college sophomore, probably like 6'6", 315. So sign me up for that, man. I absolutely love defensive linemen that size.
And if Harbaugh leaves Michigan, I think maybe make a phone call to Ernest Tauschman, see if he enters the transfer portal. No,
I don't think Michigan's going to lose very many guys to the transfer portal because they're gonna hire Sharon Moore.
Yeah.
So, that's why I think. For after watching what Alabama and Washington went through, I think that they'll hire Sharon Moore and Houshman. I mean, maybe I'm not going to say I would never say never, but I'd be surprised.
That's more me dreaming because I think we could have used him last year. Not that we needed him last year, but he would have been a nice addition to this defense.
Yeah, because he'll start next year. And the one thing is, I mean, don't sleep on this Michigan team, man, because basically they have 7 NFL draft picks on their defense. And Mel Kiper put out his 2025 draft rankings, and he believes that Will Johnson is the number 1 overall player. And Michigan has the number 1 corner, the number 1 tight end, and the number 1 defensive tackle. And they probably have like I think they have probably the 2 best defensive tackles in this upcoming class. So, and their offensive line is going to be damn good. I mean, I would take, even though Michigan's losing 5 starters on their offensive line, I would take their offensive line next year over Nebraska's in a heartbeat. So that's just, I mean, that they just have done it and developed it. So, I mean, that's where I think Nebraska can get to that point in a few years. But people thinking that Michigan's just going to fall off without Jim Harbaugh, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. I'm not saying they're going to be undefeated again. They'll lose some games, but they're not going to drop off.
And I think Ohio State's going to give everybody a run for their money, but we'll see. I mean, it's crazy the amount of money that they put into the transfer portal, and here's to, let's see if it pays off for them. I do think it's interesting that Julian Sayin ended up going to Ohio State with Will Howard, and kind of, I get that Jalen Milroe's at Alabama, but I kind of wondered if he would potentially stay with the Crimson Tide, but I guess not.
Well, Alabama just got, so there was a kid that signed with Washington who was a top 100
Austin
quarterback.
Mack, I believe.
Yeah, so he went to out. So he basically took Julian Sayin's spot, and they flipped that around. What's interesting is that Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan, one of those guys is going to transfer, and so is probably Devin Brown or Lincoln, whatever Kinholz,
Kierholtz?
whatever his.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, one of those two guys. Like somebody's transferring out this spring because you're not carrying 5 quarterbacks. I mean, maybe they're getting enough money where they'll just sit there and not play. It's possible, but I really would be surprised if Devin Brown or if Lincoln Kinholz doesn't transfer after the spring, and then I would be very, very surprised if like after the season or next spring if Air Nolan or Julian Sane, if one of those guys doesn't. I just have a hard time seeing them carrying 2 5-star quarterbacks forever. You know what I mean? And that's what they do. But my thing is like they've got all these guys. It reminds me with the Philadelphia Eagles. When they signed like Nnamdi Asomugha and they had the dream team, and they went 7-9. Ohio State's obviously not going to do that, but I just don't know if it'll be interesting. Can you build a national championship team, with some free agents? Can you make all that mesh and make all of it work? Because Ohio State's problem has never been talent. I mean, they have had more talent by far than any team in the Big Ten, even in these last 3 years. I mean, if you just look at star ratings and all that stuff, like Michigan and Ohio State, there's no comparison. So, like, is Ohio State getting more of the same? Like they got Quinshon Judkins from like Ole Miss, and I'm like, yeah, he's good. Okay. He's not any better than Travion Henderson. So it's like they've already had those guys and they still haven't won. So, we'll see. I mean, I definitely think their defense is really good and their offense is going to be really good. And we'll see if I did chuckle a little bit to myself when they hired Bill O'Brien, but more
See
power
ya,
to
Bill.
you.
See ya,
More
Bill.
power to you. Maybe Bill will actually run the ball and Ryan Day won't. I'm not sure, because if they actually played, old school football, I think that they would be kind of a dangerous team, but I'm just not. I'll believe it when I see it in terms of them truly committing to running the football and
I wouldn't
winning
hire Bill
championship football.
O'Brien based off of last year. If I was looking at guys to hire, I wouldn't be like, "Ooh, Bill O'Brien." I don't know.
It was
He
well,
was awful.
especially I thought Ryan Day was like the offensive guru, and then you hired the only offensive coordinator that Tom Brady ever had that didn't win a Super Bowl with him. Like, I mean, I don't know, man. He did a good job at Penn State, and
He did, but
he did okay at Alabama, but those people wanted him gone. They were so happy when he left. So I don't know, man.
I don't know either. And it's very. I'll just say, in the Saban era, it was very easy to do well at Alabama. So
Yeah. Although Ohio State probably isn't that far off with talent wise. I mean, he's got their 7th wide receivers, like, a 5-star that was ranked like 15th overall, probably.
well, even Julian Fleming, who's now at Penn State, he
Yeah.
wasn't the best receiver on the roster, but he was still pretty damn good. So
And he was the number 1 receiver in his class when he came out. So
yeah,
that tells you what, when you can have the number 1 overall player at his position in your class is like your 3rd wide receiver, like that shows you how much talent you got.
yeah. Hopefully, we'll get there one day, but I don't know. I mean, that's hard to do.
That's all right. I don't know if we'll ever get there recruiting wise, but I think I think we can get to a point where we're recruiting like in the top 16, like a top 16 class, like 12 to 16. And then just if you're elite at developing, I think that's all you got to do, man. Because if you just get into the top 12, like you just give yourself a chance, and that's all. It's going to be really fun. I'm so excited for this 12-team playoff. I think it's just going to like totally change the dynamics of college football.
I am too, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really do, and I always still wonder about the old BCS rankings, how things would play out with those old rankings. But I'm glad that they moved away from that and are going to the expanded playoff. But I was just looking here, and I had known this, but I think it's just worth mentioning as a side note here. Trevor Purdy is going to Nevada, so what a whirlwind couple of months for him.
And it's interesting. So, yeah, Montana State's former head coach just took the job there at Nevada. So, Chuba Purdy's going to be playing for Jeff Choate. So, we'll see. That'll be interesting to see how that works out. Obviously, he was going to go to San Jose State, and then the San Jose State coach left. And so,
Yep.
It's like it's crazy, man. If you're you go to one school and your coach leaves. How many coaching changes has Chuba Purdy gone through now? 3, and
Well, let's see.
I guess 2 because he did
Scott
the
Frost,
Nebraska. Yeah.
and then does Mickey Joseph count? Or is that just like interim?
That doesn't count probably. So I guess just 2, but still, it's kind of interesting.
It is kind of interesting, and it would have been interesting to see what he would have done. I think with Mark Whipple in a more expanded role, but I do think there's talent there. I just think that maybe he just needs a fresh start.
It would have been interesting to see what he could have done with Glenn Thomas or somebody like that on the staff last year. And, but it is what it is. And Nebraska's got their quarterback now. So, yeah, which is, last thing before we wrap up, the dumb rankings, the 24/7 rankings, they dropped Raiola to number 2 in their quarterback rankings over DJ Lagaway. And the reason was because they basically said he's a better runner, which is fine. He probably is, but I'm happy with Dylan Raiola as is. And the rankings are I just don't understand, just randomly changing the ranking at the end of the season, essentially. But whatever.
Because a quarterback is a better runner.
Yeah. Well, it was more like Dylan Raiola went to Nebraska, so we're going to drop his ranking.
Yeah, I don't pay too much attention to those rankings. I should be one of those rankings guys. Having known some, they don't know shit, and I'll say that. I mean, they barely evaluate a lot of the talent that they do rankings on. So,
I just think the ranking system, because here's you get two guys that, you watch them on film a little bit, and maybe you see some of them in person, but I just don't understand, what's the tangible difference between the 650th player and the 750th player. So that I think that I don't think there's that big of a difference. I'll just say that. So I think the teams that, potentially, hopefully Matt Rule, I do think Nebraska has shown in his short time he's good at evaluating. I think that's why they can get an advantage despite what the recruiting rankings say, because I think that at the end of the day, there's not a huge difference in terms of the talent, but you can, find the better fits for your program and the guys that have more upside. And I think Nebraska is going to be able to see those guys. I think the NFL experience of Matt Rule helps with that evaluation for sure.
Absolutely, because he knows what he wants in a quarterback and he knows what he's looking for. And I mean, he's worked with some outstanding, players like Christian McCaffrey and, Cam Newton when he was still in the league. So he knows what a good player looks like. And I think he knows how to develop better at the collegiate level, and I'm excited to see what he does with this 24 group, because like I've said before, this 24 group is going to make or break Matt Rule's tenure at Nebraska, and I think it's going to make Matt Rule's tenure. I don't think, especially after looking at Carter Nelson and Raiola this past weekend at the Polynesian Bowl, I think it's going to be very good for the program.
I think so too. I feel very good about it right now. It's going to be fun to see these guys get on campus very soon, and we'll be reporting on all of that stuff when they do. And spring ball is not that far away. So
when do the first practices start?
I don't think they've announced the practice schedule yet. I just know they have the game is April 27th. So I'm thinking probably sometime in March is when.
Yeah, it's usually mid-March, which it's January 24th right now, so it's not too far off.
So we're probably realistically like a couple months away, but winter conditioning is starting, and so the countdown to
feels like the season has ended.
Yeah, I know, but we're already counting down to the 2024 season, so that's how it rolls, man. But
that's what we love to do: just drink the pain away from the previous season and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, move forward. I'm as a Packers fan, I'm already on the mock draft season, man. So that's the only way.
Have been in mock draft season since October, so we're ready.
That's the only way you can push past the pain, man, is to look to the future. So, but the future's bright at Nebraska. Yep. So make sure on that note, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our content moving forward. Thanks again for watching, you guys. And we'll be back on Saturday morning with our usual weekly chat about Nebraska sports. So if you want to join us then, come on to the chat. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.